the title of
Oh, sorry about that.
Revolutionary Women is the first of a number of events being hosted by the Hurley Heritage Society commemorating the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War and the Declaration of Independence. Tonight, locally based poet Kate Hymes and historian Erin von Holdt will hold a conversation about the numerous roles Ulster County women played on both sides of the Revolutionary War. From the homespun cloth movement, protesting taxes, wrangling husbands and sons, keeping the home fires burning, to escaping enslavement and life as prisoners of war, women's contributions to the war effort were as varied and essential as men's. Kate Hymes, poet, lay historian, and 2024 Ulster County Poet Laureate, has been laboring in the dark dirt of history, sifting through census records, church records, old newspapers, and family trees. Inspired by the collection of fragments, factual shards from the past, her poetry imaginatively fleshes out the lives of 18th and 19th century people of African descent in Ulster County. She'll read and discuss her poems as well as the work by other poets who create art from the stories of African Americans. Erin von Holdt Gilbert is a local historian and genealogist, a direct descendant of many original Hudson Valley Dutch, Walloon, Huguenot, and English colonizing families. Her work uncovers the lives of women, enslaved persons, native Esopus, indentured servants, tenant farmers, and immigrants deliberately erased from antiquated local historical narratives. In treating these often ignored groups with respect, an accurate and inclusive history can be told, reflecting what local life really looked like for the vast majority of the population. The rich historic landscape we admire today was built on the backs of such folks who deserve to be remembered. So, without further delay, welcome Kate and Erin.
Thanks, Raleigh. All right, I am going to share my screen as I have a bunch of slides. And if everyone will let me know that you can see them, that would be great.
You see it?
Of course. Hold on a second. Okay. So I'd like to start tonight with this map, which shows what New York looked like circa 1720. And you can see all the indigenous nations here with their homelands. If we zoom in towards Ulster County, we are here on this blue dot. That's Kingston. And you can see this word Mincy, which was pronounced Muncie at the time. They are Esopus peoples, as are the Delawares who are over here to our west. What this map is missing is Mohicans, whose land straddled both sides of the river, which also meant they were some of the first people to be displaced and pushed out because land along the river was valuable. And then this is a map from the beginning of the revolution. You can see we're down here again. Kingston is right here. And what this reflects is the remnants of the French Indian War 20 years before and the ramifications it had for people who lived throughout New York State. So our Native allies were decisive in helping us defeat the French and move them out of New York. A consequence of that is that the British are still manning forts up here all along the Mohawk River Valley. This is Albany, all the way up to what we now call Canada, but for them was just another colony in North America. As we look further down, you can see that there are native villages, towns really, in the Catskills, but as the maps coming up will make clear, there is not a lot of white settlement up here. This is the Hardenberg patent, but it is full of native people still living here. We have trade records from the early 1700s for Rochester and for Kingston that include Native people coming to trade year round. So that means even in the winter, they're coming, and that implies that they're still living very close by. And then we have a string of settlement along the river, of course, but then also down what we know now as Route 209. You can see I've put a DeWitt here. They had a fortified home here during the French and Indian War, as did the Broadhead family, the Westbrooks, the Coles. There's another area down here where the Broadheads are. They end up all the way down in Pennsylvania around Bethlehem. And I'm going to center on a woman named Anne Broadhead Oliver soon. But first, I want to talk about a Native woman whose story kind of exemplifies what is going on leading up to the revolution and what is going on as a consequence. So this is a map of Mary Fowler Occam's life. Mary Fowler was born about 1732, all the way out here on the east end of Long Island, around what is now Shinnecock Bay, and she was a Montaukett Indian. She marries in 1751 a man named Samuel Occam, who was a Mohegan and was born in this area along the Thames River of Connecticut. From an early age, he made education a priority, not just his own, but educating his people as well. And he studied for years under a man named Eleazar Wheelock, who also opened a school for Native Americans right about here in Lebanon, Connecticut. When he's done with his 4 years of schooling, he goes down near Shinnecock Bay, now Southampton, to teach the Montaukett people and minister to them as well. So he's not just an educator, he's also trying to convert people to Christianity spiritually. Sorry about that. So they're there for 12 years. In 1761, they moved back to Mohegan lands right up here. This is actually where Mohegan's Sun is located, if that sounds familiar to anyone. And he continues his work educating Native people for several years until 1765, when he leaves Mary and several of their small children to go to Britain to raise money for more schools. When he gets back, Eleazar Wheelock steals the $12,000 that he has raised, moves to New Hampshire, and opens Dartmouth College. This leaves Mary and Samson and their children in a perilous situation. He is, at the time, still teaching, still trying to hold it together, but there are all these pressures pushing on Native Americans throughout Connecticut, throughout New York, and during the Revolution, we start to see this shift of people simply trying to stay away from the fighting. Samson travels all the way up to northern New York to the Oneidas and asks for land in the 1760s, but he's rebuffed. But he continues his relationship with them. And in 1775, they grant his group, calling themselves the Brotherhood Indians, hence Brothertown, land here in the Oneida country. The problem is this is the beginning of the war in upstate New York. So again, all these forts along the Mohawk River are staffed by British soldiers, and loyalists are coming for them. It's too dangerous to move there. So Samson starts ministering to make money and traveling. And in 1774, he is in Marlborough, Ulster County, where he baptizes the son of Louis Du Bois and his second wife, Rachel Jansen. Finally, towards the close of the war, the Occams are able to move here to Brothertown, but it does not last long. They are joined by another colony calling themselves the Stockbridge Peoples, which are largely Mohicans who had been displaced from along the river, and our local Esopus Munsee people. And just a few years later, Samson dies in 1792, and they are already being pushed out of this land all the way over to Wisconsin, which is where all of their descendants end up. So this is a close-up of the United Territory. You can see this map was made in 1829 by Simeon DeWitt, who actually was born in Napanoch and lived at that DeWitt Fort that I showed you earlier. That's where he grew up. This is the Brothertown Indians, the Occam patent. This is the Stockbridge patent. And you can see how all the land around them has been subdivided and subdivided and is being sold off as bounty lands to largely white revolutionary soldiers. Commonly, I had a big problem finding images that accurately represented Native people and women during the Revolutionary era. This is a picture of a Stockbridge man in Canada, and you can see he's wearing clothing. So, back to Ulster County. So we are here. There's Hurley, there's Kingston. I'm going to repeatedly tag Coldingham Manor on maps because it shows up on all these maps, even when towns like Marlborough and Milton and New Paltz Landing do not. Coldingham Manor is always here, and this is going to come up later. This is Anne Broadhead Oliver. She lives in the village of Marbletown, which no longer exists. But next door to her is the site of the first Dutch Reformed church in Marbletown. This portrait is painted by Peter Vanderlyn, and the portraiture itself is a sign of wealth. You can see she's wearing very fine laces. She marries an immigrant named Andrew Oliver, who is a weaver. And in 1777, after the burning of Kingston, their house becomes the repository for all of the documents taken out of Kingston. It is said that their house was rebuilt right after the revolution into a finer stone manor. This was supposed to be what it looked like before, but they look very similar. What happens to Anne and her family after the revolution is a clue to what's been going on during the revolution. So we have this big textile boycott. Oops, I'm sorry. Starting in the 1760s, and it's largely led by women who decide to make their own clothes and their own cloth instead of buying cloth from England. Once the war actually starts, this really intensifies. And once they cut off the harbor of New York City in 1776, we are kind of on our own. Goods are still coming from New England by land, but that takes a long time and it's very expensive. So women like Anne, whose husband was classified as a weaver, are starting what we would call today cottage industries. In their homes, in their barns, on their farms, they are setting up looms, they are setting up wheels, and they are hiring women, working class women, and the women they enslave to make cloth, which is an arduous process. But what I do know is after the revolution, Anne and her sons all build these very fancy manor houses. Her son, James, builds this house, which is just down the street. Their houses are hard to photograph because they all have trees in front of them. And this is her granddaughter-in-law, Giddy Cole Oliver. Again, a portrait, but you'll notice that all the portraits are in black and white. So if you look up any of these women's husbands, you will see full color digitized portrait paintings all over the internet. If you're looking for women, you often see just a simple black and white photograph from decades ago when collections at places like the Smithsonian and the National Portrait Gallery were cataloged. That's it, not in color, just these black and white images. And as I spoke earlier about Native Americans being pushed around, Anne's cousin, Daniel Broadhead, actually leads in 1779 the Western branch of something called the Sullivan Campaign. This is the moment that we have officially turned on Native Americans. There is no more talking, there is no more bargaining. General Washington sends about a third of his force under a man named Sullivan, who Sullivan County is named after. This guy, see Kingston here. James Clinton, the brother of Governor George Clinton, and Daniel Broadhead on this course to burn, destroy, harass, rape, pillage, and steal from every Native American settlement they find in Western and Upper New York, pushing them all towards Niagara and into Canada. At the same time, sorry, this is a picture of the beautiful land that Daniel lived on, and it's painted by George Ennis, who was born in Newburgh. So now we're coming, oh, sorry, let me check this a minute. I just skipped over my whole textile thing. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Okay, I am sorry. So, as I brought up earlier, we're talking about textile production in the Hudson Valley. I know from work that historian Eddie Moran has done that the Beviers are not only growing flax across the street from Anne Broadhead's house, they're also hiring Native people to plant and harvest it. Flax is being grown in Hurley at the wine coops. Gail just found a note that it was being grown outside the DeWitt Mills between Kingston and Hurley. And I'm sure that Anne's family also grew flax as well. Flax is then beaten, manipulated, and processed to be spun into what we call linen. So again, the difficulty in finding scenes representing women of the time. This is kind of on point in that she has a child, though I will say most spinning wheels at the time did not have foot pedals. So if I had a child, they'd probably be in charge of spinning this wheel. And you see children at the feet of women a lot in these caricatures. This is another illustration of a woman weaving in a garret, in an attic garret. You can tell, similar to homes that we still have around Ulster County. And this is actually an Irish illustration because I couldn't find one of New York. Here's another that kind of illustrates everyone in a household working on making linen textiles. This is accurate, except it's only depicting white people. So if this was Anne's house, we'd probably have a lot of women of color in this picture as well. But this overcrowding, this kind of almost a mess as you see it, is pretty accurate to how people lived in very small homes. Looms are enormous. And this would have taken up a lot of time and a lot of space for those who could afford it. For those who couldn't, they're probably going to work at houses like Anne's. Speaking of representation, this is what we get when we try, most of the time when we try to look at for images of women in the Revolution. This is a portrayal of Betsy Ross that is entirely inaccurate, and you can see every woman in this photo is dressed to the nines. which would not have happened. This is Martha Washington's needle book that she embroidered herself. This is much more typical of what women of higher classes were actually sewing. There is a ribbon on this that can be tucked in so it hangs from the side of your skirt, and this held sewing needles and pens. But for larger production, we are talking about tons of women and a lot of space needed to deal with this. This is a Scottish illustration that shows women of the period working outdoors. And this woman is spinning onto a little spindle. This is something that working and lower class women could take home with them and work at home doing, instead of in kind of like a sweatshop type environment. So as I've said, I have had serious problems finding women of color in any of these depictions. These are actually WPA photographs from the Great Depression. But what you can see is that not much has changed for these women. The clothing is still basically the same. It just has patterns. This woman has no shoes, which at the time of the revolution, you will hear a lot about people going without shoes. They were expensive. So, Kate, do you want to say anything? Is Kate muted? Is Kate here? I
There we
love.
go. I'm here, but I am muted. The only thing that I would add in terms of women of color, we know from particularly, it's later, but she writes about memories of her mother and stories that her mother told her, Sojourner Truth, and that yes, women were working together in the household doing a variety of tasks. So this would have been consistent that many of them would have been involved in producing cloth.
Yep. Her mother was a young woman during the revolution, and I'm sure she was.
Yep.
So this brings us to the Marbletown disaffection, which literally, for many people, translated into join or die here. This is the Kingston Courthouse, where many local Ulster County men were held in the basement jail for anything from actually spying for the British Army to simply saying in a tavern that you thought the Patriots wouldn't win. When this becomes overcrowded, we enlist prison ships that are docked on the Rondout in Kingston, and they are just as awful as the notorious prison ships in New York City, like the New Jersey. So several families from the Marbletown disaffection come from this area called Shokan, which later becomes Lapala. This is just above the town of Marbletown and Anne Broadhead Oliver's house. They also come from Cripplebush, which is right over here. And Stone Ridge, interestingly, is not even a town yet. You have the Wine Coops, the Lounsburys, and the Hasbrooks that have large manor houses and enormous estates over here. But Cripplebush is more of a settlement. So, and this is another view that shows this Hardenberg patent encroaching down into Ulster County. This was most of northern Ulster County and the Catskills, the Hardenberg patent. Sparsely settled by white people, but still fully inhabited by Native Americans until about 1778. And then in 1779, when things get truly horrible. Yeah? Oh, someone's not muted. Sorry about that. So Anne's house is right here, and it's represented by this little church. She went to church and is actually a witness at the baptisms of many of these families from the disaffections, children's baptisms and ceremonies at the church. Her brother is married to a Middaugh. And the Middaughs, the Rosas, one of the oldest families from Hurley, and the Markles are the families I want to talk about because when I started looking at their genealogy, I'm sorry, it's her cousin, Daniel. I kept noticing this name, Cock, Koch, Coke, Cook, coming up for these women. And it turns out they run throughout this entire story. So Anne's cousin Daniel is married to a Cook woman. The Cooks came here in the late 1600s as English officers, and they settled at Marbletown. They also settled all the way down at Raritan, New Jersey. And it's interesting, they keep up both residences. So you have women in Ulster County who are born in Raritan, and you have people in Raritan who are born in Ulster County. So here's Daniel Broadhead and his wife, the son of Samuel Cook and Bridget Middaugh. Another person accused, arrested, and has his property sold is Wilhelmus Markle. He is married to Bridget's daughter, Sarah. Madeline is married to Jacob Middaugh. So Wilhelmus is jailed. He's forced to sell his land. The story of what happens to that later is interesting. Madeline and Jacob are both deceased by the time the war starts, but their grandson, Jacob, is arrested and executed in front of the Kingston courthouse in 1777. So I tried to do more family trees on this, and it is honestly so complicated it wouldn't even fit on the screen. It got really nuts. So Gisbert Rusa is another man who is cited in the Marbletown disaffection, and I believe this is his father, Jacobus. His brother, Jacob Rusa, is also executed in Kingston outside the courthouse. His wife is a Middaugh, and she is also the granddaughter of Jacob and Madeline Cook. So there's a lot more to do on the Cook women, but I thought it was interesting that of these 50 men, about a dozen of them have ties to Cook women. And I found that fascinating. So this is a register of claims in Canada for properties lost during the Revolution. Like many of the Native Americans, all of these people are forced up into Canada. And I see here are my textile slides. So this is the attic space now of the Anne Broadhead Oliver house. You can imagine how many women they could have had packed in here working, and that's probably exactly what happened in this space. Not this shiny, not this beautiful, cold, drafty. No, excuse me. So the textiles they're making, we often think of clothing for soldiers, clothing for the home, but they also made fabric for tents. This is a portion of George Washington's linen tent that's at the Van Cortlandt House Museum. They also made sails. As the British move up and down the Hudson River, they're burning every boat they see. And not only does every boat have to be rebuilt, every sail has to be remade. And that's women's work. And it would have taken probably 2 or 3 months' time for a single woman to make a sail. I don't think they did it from start to finish, but it was an extreme amount of work. So, yes, okay. Coldingham, remember, it's always on the map. At the bottom of Ulster County, it's now part of Orange County. But at the time, Ulster County went all the way down here past Newburgh. And it also included what is now Sullivan County. So Anne's house is up here. We have these settlements out here. And among the DeWitts and the Broadheads are also the Clinton family. Charles Clinton came here as a soldier with the British Army in the French and Indian War. He also settles on what's now 209. His son James marries Mary DeWitt, and his son George, the future governor of New York, is even more of a coup because he marries Cornelia Tappan from Kingston. But I want to talk about what happens to their very good friends, the Coldens. This is the family of Cadwallader Colden, who was the lieutenant governor of New York on and off for many years, and his wife, Alice Christie Colden. This is her. Again, just a black and white catalog photo from a collection at a museum. This is their manor house on Long Island in Flushing, Queens. So when Cadwallader Colden Sr. is burned in effigy during the stamp protests in the 1760s, they retreat here to Flushing, Queens, to this beautiful house, which later becomes behind British lines. This is their daughter, Jane, who I cannot go without mentioning. And here again, you see Coldenham on the map when most towns aren't even on the map. Jane was one of the first American botanists and the first female botanist of renown. Her father has placed her here in Lower Ulster County on a huge estate with not many people around. So she studies botany. She keeps these beautiful journals. She gives the plants she finds native and important taxonomic names. She names the gardenia. And then she dies in child before the war, which is the fate of too many women. But her brother, Cadwallader Colden, refuses to leave and has enough hubris to think that though he is a vocal loyalist, he will still be okay. He is not. This is his sister, Elizabeth Colden Delancey, who is living at Coldenham in Lower Ulster during the war. So Cadwallader Colden is also sent to New York, probably living in Flushing, Queens at his family manor house, while the women of his family are still in Coldingham. What happens to them is quite different than what happened to the men and women in the Marbletown disaffection. His property is not confiscated. He spends a few nights in jail occasionally, but then he often gets paroled. During the burning of Kingston, he is actually supposed to be at the Van Dusen house in Hurley. And I'm sorry, I'm not even going to go into Ralph Felton because we're running out of time. So as we think about what happens to people based on class, people who are living up here and have mortgaged properties or are tenant farmers, regardless of how long they've been in Ulster County, have very little clout. They are in jail, they are in prison ships. People like the Coldens, who is very good friends with the DeWitts and with the Winecoops and the Clintons and the Tappins in Kingston, are sort of banished elsewhere for a while, but have very little consequences to pay. I could not find a portrait of his wife. What this does lead us into, speaking of this area by Coldenham, so this is it again on a map, Coldenham, right here in Lower Ulster, is the story of Mary Freeborn Lattimore, which Kate is going to tell.
Yes. Okay, I'm not as well versed in all of this as Erin is, but there's lots of intriguing things to know about Mary Freeborn Lattimore. A little bit of reading I have been doing, which is really interesting for enslaved people freed in it seems Connecticut and Rhode Island. You encounter the last name Freeman quite often.
Mhm.
So I've come to believe it's a designation of their status.
Mhm.
So the records show that Mary Freeman was born in Rhode Island and that she married a mariner by the name of Benoni Lattimore. And I believe there was a landowner named Lattimore in that area of Connecticut as well.
Yep.
Now, he had negotiated, which is also, I'm finding really interesting. He had negotiated his freedom by the time of their marriage. And their marriage must have occurred sometime mid 18th century.
Mhm.
Don't have a precise date here, but mid 18th century, their marriage should have occurred. Um, it's fascinating to me anyway, looking at material from just prior to the Revolutionary War, where there are discussions of freedom and liberty and people who belong versus people who do not. For it creates an opportunity for people of African descent to begin to negotiate what their status is in society. And it takes many forms. And one of the forms it takes is people begin to negotiate with their slavers ways in which they become free, and in this case, freedom. In some other cases, ways in which they can negotiate in terms of employment and various other activities. So they marry. I was also struck by the fact that he's a mariner. We're learning that mariners play a very important role, and in this case, this heritage of having been a mariner is passed down to his descendants and plays a rather important role here in the Hudson Valley later. By 1761, we find the couple. They have obtained land in Milton. Okay, thank you, Erin. In the Milton area. And the Milton area is noticeable. So that's by 1761. The Milton area is noticeable because it has a significant influx of Presbyterian families and an influx of Quakers from northern Long Island. And just as an aside as well, they're probably coming up from Long Island Long Island and New York City. We also know that there's some Methodists who come into this area as well. What we don't know if the Lattimores, if Benoni and Mary had any connection to any of these Quakers, it would make historical sense if they may have had connections to the Quakers who were moving up from northern Long Island. Question for you, Erin, were these Quakers that belonged to the Hicksite?
They were indeed Hicksite Quakers.
Yeah, okay. And that too then becomes important for for the Lattimore family. One, that they had experience that as mariners. Two, that they were living in the vicinity of Hicksite Quakers. So he builds a home and he runs a ferry across the Hudson to Dutchess County. Okay, I see it there on the map. There's Lattimore's Ferry. And he probably would have been running the ferry for a variety of reasons in terms of people and goods and other things that they were carrying back and forth across the area. But there's good reason to believe that some of the people they may have been ferrying back and forth were individuals who were seeking to escape from their enslavers. And one of the things we're learning is that possibly too little attention has been paid to the Hudson River as a thoroughfare on the Underground Railroad. We tend to think of it as something that occurs over land, but there is evidence and recent research to indicate that at least here in this region, the river itself might have been the most notable thoroughfare for people who were seeking freedom or self-emancipating. Let's see, what else do I have here on these two? I found it fascinating that the couple has two sons, Benjamin and Roger. They enlist in the regiment of Colonel Louis Du Bois, and you can see him at the bottom portion of the map here. And on the enlistment records, neither of the two sons are listed as being colored, which is interesting. Do you have anything more to say about the fact that neither of them are listed as being colored, Erin?
Well, George Washington had severe opinions about Black men serving in his army. He resisted, his orders resisted having enslaved men join their white enslavers in war, but we know that this happened from the very beginning, that people, including people here from Ulster County, were taking men that they enslaved with them amongst their regiments. The Lattimores are free. James Hunter is also free. He enlists with them. Jeremiah Briggs, I do not know about, but I do think it's possible that these people in the unit, and who knows who else there is right now, we're still digging, were not indicated as being people of color because Louis Du Bois knew it would show up on the returns and he didn't want the trouble.
Ah, that's interesting. I was wondering, I understood about Washington's reluctance to have Black men serve in the army, in the Revolutionary War Army. So I was curious about Louis Du Bois actually permitting Black men to enlist under his command, and how would they? Well, an obvious question, how would they keep the fact that they were Black men secret from Washington? So this was just a paperwork exchange, that when Washington looked over the enlistment papers, or someone aligned with Washington looking over the enlistment papers, they wouldn't be able to tell.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So I think all of these men, Benjamin and Roger Lattimore, Jeremiah Briggs, James Hunter, that they all served during battles at Forts Montgomery and Clinton in 1777. Benjamin was captured and taken to New York City. And it's interesting, he was then required, forced to work as a servant for the British Army. And meanwhile, his brother Roger had escaped with Du Bois. Later, and about a year later, Benjamin is noted as having enlisted by a small British force seeking to rescue some of the men held by the Patriots outside Tarrytown. So he shows up as enlisted in the British force.
No,
Erin?
well, he's conscripted by them.
Thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes more sense. Yeah. So he's conscripted by them. And I guess this skirmish or this to use a contemporary word, this excursion to release patriots outside of Tarrytown that he's able to use that as an opportunity to escape and rejoin the Continental Army.
Yeah.
And then records, at this point, there's no further record of the son Roger when he escapes. It is known that their father dies about 1786 after the end of the war. I'm not sure when Mary passes, but their legacy, as I had mentioned before, is a legacy of their children living along the Hudson and working. They're also noted for working to establish schooling for Black children and to be stewards or assisting others who are self-emancipating using the Hudson River as their thoroughfare.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, let's see. Mary Briggs. We don't seem to have a lot of, I like that.
Yeah,
So
this is
kind of
later.
vessel.
Yeah, this is from the 1860s, but you can see not much has changed. So this is the Milton Ferry, which was the Lattimores. This ferry is very similar to the open boat that they had, which could transport anything, including horses and carriages.
Mhm.
And then you can still see all these ships on the river. And what I want you to see is all those sails and how enormous those sails are. And know that during the war, when all the little ships like this were burnt, it was women who had to remake all those sails.
Would that be the same kind of ferry that would have been working at New Paltz Landing at the time?
I don't know about New Paltz Landing, but yes, probably. Yeah.
Okay, because the only reason I'm asking is because A.J. Williams Myers writes about Poughkeepsie
Yes.
and the Underground Railroad,
Yes.
from which the New Paltz Landing wouldn't have been very far.
No, but we know Milton was used because here below Poughkeepsie is in Dutchess County is also a major place of Quaker settlement and documented Underground Railroad running all through this area south of Poughkeepsie. So Highland New Paltz Landing is up here.
Okay.
Poughkeepsie's here. So the Lattimore Ferry was more, I don't want to say sneaky, but certainly attracted far less attention than you would get going from New Paltz Landing to Poughkeepsie.
Oh, okay. And also the settlement continued to be largely Quaker and Presbyterians and a few Methodists thrown in that would have been more supportive, and people were going from one settlement of that nature across the river to another settlement of that nature.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So Mary Briggs appears in the 1790 census. as a free woman of color living in the town of Marlborough. And she's believed to be the wife of the previously mentioned Jeremiah Briggs, or the widow of the previously mentioned Jeremiah Briggs. And she is living next to the Du Boises, Louis Du Bois, and that's what we see here on the census record here. This is the 1790 census, or is this the 1800 census? Which is
This is
it?
1800. They constantly move around. Yeah.
There are 11 people. I wasn't able to see it very clearly on here, but if you trace it over and you take a look at her, she is.
There were 11 in 1790, and in 1800, there are 8 free people in her house. All of them are.
Okay, that's what, yeah, I couldn't figure out what that figure was, so that's an 8.
Yep.
Yep. So there are a total of 11 people in her household, 8 of whom are free people, which is interesting. Now, okay, I have to go. Okay. And it indicates that her household is moving around a bit, and that by 1820 we lose track of her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it isn't clear either what happens to, we had lost track of Jeremiah as well. Am I correct? No record of him.
No record of him after the war.
Yeah. So I find it fascinating that she appears there living next to Louis Du Bois.
Me too. Who her husband had served under. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And she is the only free household of color in Marlborough at that time. The Lattimores are gone after Benoni's death, and she is the only one left.
She is, okay.
So,
go ahead.
We're going to come back to that. I really got thrown by my slides because we left out the story of what happened to the land confiscated after the Marbletown disaffection. And I don't know what is going on with that. So I'm going to pull up those slides because it's really important. So Wilhelmus Markel loses his land, which is right up here. And I'll just tell this story kind of fast. So this is the area that was known as Shokan. It is now the Ashokan Road, but it becomes known as Lapala. What happens to William Markel in the Mid-Oz and the other lands that are confiscated around here is that they end up in the hands of a free Black community by the 1780s. This map is from the 1790s. And the only person marked here, right where their village was, where this stream goes, is Benjamin Keeter. Benjamin Keeter was a Revolutionary War veteran who married a woman that had been enslaved by his parents. Her name was Leah. And they lived up here until the mid-1810s, when they took his bounty lands from the war in upstate New York, the lands that they had confiscated from Native Americans, and they disappear into whiteness. All of them pass. And we only know this because a descendant contacted us who thought he was white and had found African American blood in his DNA test. So in 1800, these are the households. Benjamin Keeter is always enumerated as a white man. These 5 free people are his wife and children. The man who actually owns Wilhelmus Markel's almost 80 acres is Cornelius Robinson and his wife, Judith Broadhead Robinson. And this is their household of 5 free people, all of them in 1800. So what do I want to say? So Judith Broadhead was most likely enslaved by the Broadhead family, possibly by Anne Broadhead Oliver, her cousin Henry, who owned a mill across the street, her brother Richard, her first cousin Daniel, who lived down the road. We have no idea. But she ends up married to Cornelius Robinson. Their children marry into some of the oldest Black families in Ulster County. So including the Van Gaspecks. If you go down here, you will see there are Brinks, there are Deos, and there's a curious family that appears about the same time with the last name Sampson or Sampson. I don't know for sure that this is connected to Samson Occam, but they show up with people who come from Stockbridge, Massachusetts, which is another community of displaced Native people. And I find that incredibly interesting. So here is what the community becomes. This is a map I made circa 1860 for the Marbletown Hurley area, where I put all the people of color in color back on the map. So you can see Anne Broadhead's house was here. It's now in the hands of her in-laws, the Olivers. This is Fording Place Road, which no longer exists and connects to Ashokan Road. And as you go up Ashokan, there's this little road called Lapla that splits off. This is where Henry Broadhead's mill was. And then you have this community, this huge community of Lapala up here that has formed with all these descendants. The Jansons, the DeWitts have all joined them. The Sampsons are still there, the Smiths, you still see the Robinsons. And this community lasts well into the 20th century. And it's one of probably the best things that could have come from a horrible situation that the Cook family women, the Markles, the Ruzas, and the Middaws, were placed in. And with that, it is 8 o'clock. I knew this was going to happen, that we were going to run out of time. So we do have more stories to tell, and many, many more that I actually already had to cut. So this is definitely just the beginning of a lecture series. And I am happy to now take questions.
There were several of them in the chat that I noticed coming in.
I couldn't even see the chat, so I bet there are. Yeah. So if you want to ask a question, you can unmute yourself and ask us directly too. I can't hear whoever is speaking.
Me neither.
I think that's just background noise.
Oh no. Okay. So let me.
If it's at all helpful, there's one from a PS, if PS wants to identify himself. And he's currently or she, I shouldn't say he, currently at Dartmouth College, taking care of Ella Anzer's Wheelock's grave, along with the members of his family, and Occam Pond is just a 5-minute walk from.
That is fascinating, Petra.
I see now the name, Petra.
That's
anything. Is Petra still here? Is
Petra Sargent, and she's a DeWitt, Davis, Rusa, and Broadhead descendant. So we covered her in many ways in this program. I also know Kate McCullough is here. We have been nerding out about the Marbletown disaffection, and that's just even like a longer program and paper that we're going to have to write together because it's so much. The Cook family is absolutely fascinating. Okay, what were they executed for? For being loyalists. So the Marbletown disaffection, in the smallest of ways, is about a group of about 50 men who are from Ulster County, Marbletown, and Hurley and Kingston area who want to go join the British at New York City, and they are caught. Jacob Middaugh has already been to New York City and has come back to recruit more men. Why this is appealing to them is that the British are actually offering money. They're offering 100 acres for every man who serves and 50 acres to their wives. So these are people who can no longer pay their bills because money is not circulating anymore. Our port in New York City has been cut off. Our goods are not being shipped out. They're being supplied to the army. But the army is rarely paying anyone because our new constitution has nothing in it about taxing the states. And the states don't want to pay taxes to support the army. So working class people are in incredibly dire straits here. There are men who do not report for service because they don't have shoes, and they are then fined £5 sterling.
Oh my
Really
God.
cannot pay if they don't have shoes.
Oh.
Yeah, so Gisbert Rusa's brother, Jacob Rusa, and Jacob Middaugh are executed in Kingston at the Kingston courthouse, probably publicly, as a message. Everyone else is sentenced to death, but they are eventually let go. That is what happened. Oh, and you're sworn out. You crazy.
There was a question about the disaffection itself.
Yeah, so that is the disaffection.
Okay.
What happens afterwards is that many of these men are forced to sign the loyalty oath and then sign up in continental regiments. About half of them walk away. The Middaughs in particular are split down the line. I cannot imagine what it was like for these women to have someone in your family, your son, your grandson, executed, and then have to send your other son or grandson to serve with the men who executed him. So half the Middaughs go to Canada, half of them stay in Ulster County, some of them even stay on Hurley Mountain. And they don't change their name to Murdoch, but they start pronouncing it and writing it as what appears to us as Murdoch, which apparently is how it was pronounced. So yeah.
Okay, I have one other question about the bounty lands in Western New York. What exactly was those, and what made that available to the Keeter family?
So what happens after, especially the Sullivan campaign in 1779, is that maps are already being redrawn, parceling out all of the land that formerly belonged to Native people. Like full on, the entire North and Western New York state is plotted out. And this is how they pay people, by promising them these bounty lands for service, because they simply cannot pay them cash. So a lot of people, wealthier people who lived in Ulster County, claimed their bounty lands and rented them out to tenant farmers. This is part of what leads to the anti-rent wars in the 1840s. And some people actually moved there for various reasons, but all of that land before 1779 belonged to Native people.
Oh.
Anybody else? Okay, well, I guess go ahead, Riley.
No, I was going to say, this is your chance to ask any remaining questions of these two wonderful guests that we have this evening. Speak up or forever hold your peace.
It's just the first in the series. I have halved this presentation again and again and again because there are just too many women to cover. So I'm thinking next time we'll do Hurley centered. How's that sound?
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I want to thank everyone for their attendance and turning out this evening, and of course, a huge, big thank you to both Kate and Erin. Thank you so much.
You.
Stay
Thank you, everyone.
Stay tuned for more lectures this year from the Hurley Heritage Society, and be sure to mark your calendars for the season opening of the museum this coming early May. It's right around the corner.
We'll have a lot of textile stuff and spinning and all kinds of things. So please join us in person.
With
Thanks.
that said, unless anyone has any further questions, we'll end the evening on that note. Thank you again to both of you for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.